Hello and welcome to this tutorial on the Unity user interface. We'll start by looking at all of the tabs and menus and then focus on interacting with the game objects. This is what Unity should look like if you've just downloaded it, with your hierarchy here with just a camera and a light, with your inspector panel here and your project and asset folders. If you do have some errors down here at the bottom left, don't worry about that. You can just pop into console and clear those. That should be fine. Okay, to start with, we're just going to have a look at the menus up here. If we open File, we can see that it talks about scenes and projects. Your project is the entire game that you are creating from start to finish, whereas the scenes could be a particular aspect or level in your project, in your game. So you could be either a main menu scene, level 1 scene, game over scene, that sort of thing. In build settings, we can decide which of the scenes that we have created will be in the final build of the game when we eventually finish it. And here we can decide which platform that we build to. So I'll close that for now. As you can see, I've got some errors down here now. That's simply because I clicked Android and it's telling me very nicely that I can't build to Android right now. My system isn't set up for that. Next we have Edit, which is your usual copy paste undo, but also contains the project settings, which can be quite useful to know they're there. Assets is just to import assets that you've downloaded from the asset store maybe. Game objects and component, you can create new game objects, or you can create component, which is data and logic for those game objects, but usually I would just create those from the hierarchy panel or from the inspector panel. Speaking of which, let's go look at the inspector panel. First I'm just going to left click on our light, and you can see that the inspector panel has filled with all the information regarding this light. So that's what makes it a light, which is the light component, which is it has your color, your intensity, that sort of thing. And also we've got transform here. Transform is you're going to find on every single game object that you have. So even the camera over here, every game object needs a transform, because every game object needs a location to exist at in your 3D space within your scene. So that's in the X, Y and Z position of your world. So we've got here our X, our Y and our Z. So if we moved it in X, moves in Y, up and down, and in Z. So every game object that you will have will be somewhere in your world, and it will have its rotation, and it will have a scale, but scale isn't really visible when we change it on lights or cameras. Okay, the only thing that differentiates this camera from this light are the components that it has on it. So if we were to get rid of the camera component and add a light component, it could function as a light. If we were to get rid of this light component, it's now just an empty game object. It exists at a point in space because it has a transform, but it does absolutely nothing. Okay, we can add new components simply by clicking Add Component and going through all the different components. It's just much easier than going through the component window up here. There's lots of different components, don't worry about that. Now let's just move on to the hierarchy panel. The hierarchy panel will show you all of the objects that exist in your virtual world. We've got the camera here, got the light, and if we wanted to create a new one, we could right click, 3D object, cube, and that's created a cube here, which we can move to the center of our world by popping 0 in each of the axes. So the transform is relative to the world unless the game object is a child of another. What that means is, if we grab this camera and move it, rotate it over there so it can see the box. Okay, if we grabbed it in the hierarchy, left click, drag it into the cube, the main camera is now a child of the cube. The cube is the parent. Now the main camera's transform up here is not relative to the world, it's relative to the box. So if we moved this cube, the camera moves with it, and if we zeroed the camera, it would not zero into the world center, but it will be in the exact same place as the box. If we rotated the box, the camera would also rotate. So that's the parent-child relationship in the hierarchy. Now, you've seen me move around in this scene view quite a bit. We can select with the left mouse button. We can select several things by clicking and dragging. We can pan around with the middle button, so that's your scroll button, and we can scroll with the scroll wheel to zoom. I can also hold down the Alt button, and with the left mouse button I can just rotate around an object. And if we hold down the right mouse button, we can use WASD to move around like a floating first-person camera, which is sometimes useful. In order to manipulate objects, once we've selected them, if you press W, that will be our transform position. We can move in each of the axes, or in two axes at the same time, if we select this little square. If we press E, that will be rotation. So free rotation if you grab within this grey part, or you can rotate on a particular axis if you grab one of the lines of the axes. And R, which does scale, which you won't notice on the camera, but if I grab this cube, I can scale it in that position, and there, and there. As you can see, the camera is being affected by everything I do to this cube. You just can't tell because the camera has no physical aspect to it, so you can't tell any different from scaling. Now, what you're seeing down here is the game view, which is the view of the camera. We can see that a bit bigger and a bit better in the game view here, and you can drag that entire view here if you wanted to. So it can be very useful to have both of those active at the same time to see what it is that your player would be seeing. I'll drag that back up here. And your asset store is just a quick and easy access to the Unity asset store within the Unity interface. So you can download assets from the web. Right, there's only one panel left to go here at the bottom, rather two panels. We have our console, which is going to give us all of our errors and cautions that Unity might be wanting to tell us about, or when we're coding, we can put our debug messages in there and they'll pop up here, which is very useful for getting some logic into our game objects. And here we have our asset folders. Now these folders actually exist on our file system of our computer. So if I were to right click and create a new folder, let's call it tutorial, and I'll just show in Explorer, you can see that tutorial folder has been created on our actual file system of our computer as well. And if I were to grab this cube and drag it into our tutorial folder, we can see that we have a cube.prefab in our file system. Now what this cube.prefab does is means that we can reuse this cube with a camera as its child however many times we want in any different project. So if we were to grab this, we could create another, and another, and another. And we'll create as many as we wanted. And we could even create them in other projects from just dragging in this cube.prefab into another project. So we'll just create. So if you could import this asset in to use on different projects or different scenes and reuse them. This is one of the main aspects of game creation within Unity, is creating prefabs and reusing them. Okay, so that appears to be everything for the basic user interface. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Stay tuned for more tutorials. Thank you very much.